Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Princeton, where in our open and welcoming community we live our message of hope, love, justice, and joy. We extend a special welcome to our visitors this morning. We're really happy that you've joined us, and we'd love to get to know more about you after the service. If you haven't already stopped by the newcomer table in Robinson Lounge, please do so that we can give you a proper welcome and add you to our e-list so that we can invite you to all of the different ministries and events and programs that we have happening here, and there are always a lot of them. One announcement is that the UU Princeton Zen Sangha meets today at 11:45 in Foz Theater. Practice consists of chanting the Heart Sutra and 25 minutes of silent meditation, followed by a Dharma talk and a discussion. All are welcome. New and seasoned meditators are welcome, and instructions will be given for those who need it. So if you are new, this is a really great way to get introduced to that practice. Also, the Rainbow Ministry had such a successful first discussion of Genderqueer, a memoir, that they decided to do it again, this time on Zoom, on February 15th at 7 p.m. They had the first one in person last week. The next one will be on Zoom on February 15th at 7 p.m. Copies of Genderqueer, the most banned book in the United States, are on sale in Robinson Lounge after the service. And just keep an eye on e-happenings in your email for the Zoom link to that event on February 15th at 7 p.m. And we are so thrilled to announce our new interim music director, Samuel Stevenson. Samuel is a warm, experienced, and exceptional choir director who is very eager to join our music ministry. He impressed our music director search team greatly. He rehearsed with the choir, who loved him, and he is eager to start with us. His first Sunday will be on March 2nd. He'll actually be here the week before that to start rehearsing the choir and getting to know everybody. I want to say a special, humongous thank you to Candace Hedberg, Drake Baer, Jean DeVoe, Audrey Pico, and Joelle Piercy, who were the music director search team. And another big thank you to all of our music ministry volunteers, and especially to Sue Denouter, who are doing so much great ministry for us during this transition period. So we have another month or so of that transition period, and then Samuel will start with us. There's a handout in Robinson Lounge, an information sheet about him, so that you can start to learn more about him, and we'll have more of that in the month to come. But thank you again to the search team for your great work in that. And now, grateful for each and welcoming all, let us be together for a time of peace and balance in this space of community and acceptance, for a sacred hour in which we can remember the good, seek the true, and look together toward that love that holds all. Come, let us worship together.
If I speak in the tongues of mortals and angels, but do not have love, I am a noisy gong or clanging cymbal. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things. Love never ends. When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became an adult, I put an end to childish ways. Now we see in a mirror, in a riddle. Now faith, hope, and love abide, these three, and the greatest of these is love. 1 Corinthians 13.
And let us join together in prayer. Spirit of life and love, we give thanks for this new day and fresh air, and this time to be alive, time to think and wonder and sing and dance, time to be alone and time to be with others, time to console and time to challenge. We see a world in need of more love, more justice, more goodness and truth. And we give thanks for our roles in bringing these to life in our homes and communities, in our counties and states, in our countries and world. Let us move with the confidence of your love and hope toward bringing about better and more beautiful days, and a sacred and more sustainable future, and a creative and more caring world. Let us move through life with your spirit of love and justice, that in our circles large and small, we might bring your blessings to more lives. And here in the silence of this sacred space, we offer these, the prayers and meditations of our hearts. May it be so, and amen. Our first reading this morning is they're both poems. The first one is titled Love Poem with Apologies for My Appearance by Ada Limon. She writes, "Sometimes I think you get the worst of me. The much-loved loose forest green sweatpants, the long, braless days, hair knotted and uncivilized, a shadowed brow where the devilish thoughts do their hoofed dance on my brain. I'd like to say this means I love you. The stained white cotton t-shirt, the tears, pistachio shells, the mess of orange peels on my desk. But it's different than that. I move in this house with you, the way I move in my mind, unencumbered by beauty's cage. I do like I do in the tall grass, more animal me than much else. I'm wrong. It is that I love you, but it's more that when you say it back, lights out, a cold wind through the curtains, for maybe the first time in my life, I believe it." And the second poem is titled At the Beautiful Gate by Paul Willis. How many times have you seen this on a football field? The hulking tackle after the play, reaching down to the halfback and pulling him up with a sure, strong grip. Every once in a while, a player from the other team will do this for his flattened opponent. A reenactment of miracle, of resurrection, again and again. Not carted off the turf this time, but rising with a little help to stand once more on his own 2 feet. What else could you want, really? Something almost worth the shock of that hard embrace of overthrow, that crash and crush into the earth.
Good morning. Playwrights in ancient Greece sometimes used a storytelling device called the Deus ex machina, which means the God from the machine. This device was sometimes used in plots that were otherwise too complex or ridiculous to resolve otherwise. Suddenly a crane swings into view over the stage, and a god perched there intervenes in the story. The intervention is surreal, miraculous, and probably contains a wink by the playwright at the absurdity of taking our stories too seriously. Because my husband, Michael, is a performance history professor and we were often in Greece, I have seen lots of theater using this device and it has never failed to annoy me. Come on, Euripides, that's just cheating. Euripides would probably laugh at me for expecting his play or any life to make sense. As a humanist, I love the ancient Athenians for their respect for all facets of humanity, each represented by a different god, which can render even horrific human traits sacred in a way. Also, as a humanist, I believe the word God and the word love point to the same thing. So God from the machine could read as love from the machine for me. When I'm overwhelmed by the seemingly infinite paradoxes embedded in politics, social justice, and my own psychology, I seem to require a deus ex machina at every turn, a crane hoisting God as love over the stage of my thought or relationships, my life, proclaiming itself omnipotent and keeping me sane. I sometimes impose the face of Jesus on the God from the machine. Sometimes I impose the face of Hades, the confusingly changeable god of the underworld who can move from menacing to loving in a heartbeat, like my appalling drunk uncle at Thanksgiving this year. When God as love looks like Hades to me, love is really hard, and I know it's supposed to be. This week, I was asked to be a deus ex machina, which is why I'm wearing velvet this morning. A 20-something friend texted just after midnight on my birthday to say he'd be unable to come over that day as planned. He'd just totaled his car. Gabe, not his real name, is super smart, hardworking, funny, politically provocative, and always fun to be around. He's also poor, with never more than $200 to his name, student loan debt, full-time classes, and multiple jobs that require him to drive all over Central and North Jersey. Gabe has no family he can turn to in emergencies. During the several years he's known us, he's never asked us for help and has been reluctant to accept the little help we've offered. He once said, "Being poor is really expensive." And he knows that totaling his junker of a car with only liability insurance could upend everything he's worked for. I suppose offering our car to him for a few weeks until we can cobble together a loan for him to buy another one casts us in the role of Gabe's Deus ex machina. But his vulnerability and trust in us feels like the miracle Michael and I needed this week, a miracle of pleasure in being able to help and in his willingness to accept our love. When I thanked Gabe for offering us this Deus ex machina moment, like, while not being a drunk uncle, he just looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Euripides would understand.
A dog once wandered away from her people, exploring a local fair. She looked in this booth and that one, searching for bits of food and some scratches on the head. She strolled into a particular room and started looking around and found to her great surprise that the room was full of other dogs. There were dozens of them, all quietly watching her. She looked around and became unnerved by their silence and the way they just stared back at her. She began to think that they might attack her, and she became fearful. So she gave a good loud warning bark, just in case they were thinking about starting anything. They immediately barked back at her, all of them in unison as though they were a team. She got even more frightened and barked even louder, and they continued to return the threat. Soon the dogs were barking nonstop, as loudly as they could, all focused right on her. It was then that the dog heard the call of the person who had gone looking for, of her person who had gone looking for her. She followed that familiar voice out into the fresh open air and away from the threat, and she showered the person with kisses. The person asked her, not really expecting an answer, "What were you doing in the Hall of Mirrors? You were causing quite a ruckus in there." The dog was barking at herself the whole time. She was frightened of herself, threatened by herself, angered by and eager to harm herself. Every bark she heard was her own. This story is a folk tale that comes from India and has lots of versions. This retelling sets the incident in a fairground, which is the setting where I first came across it in a book of global wisdom tales by the author Margaret Silf. Other versions set it in a museum and tell it in different ways, but they all reach a point where the dog identifies in others something that is really within. The suspicion, the fear, the anger, all of that's within. We've all known this about ourselves from time to time. That which annoys us in someone else may very well be something that annoys us about ourselves, if we think about it. I've been working to very little success on ridding myself of the tendency to say "like" quite often and for no real reason. It's just a word that frequently comes out of my mouth, and I'd rather not so often and for no reason, and so I'm trying to stop that. I'm using mindfulness and all that grueling, intentional inner stuff that takes forever and requires an often uncomfortable level of self-awareness. And I only noticed that tendency because I was listening to a podcast where the person being interviewed said it so often that I had to turn the podcast off. Something clicked in my brain and I realized, oh, I do that too. And so I turned the podcast back on and dealt with the likes, letting each harden my resolve to like less. It's not really working, but such is the journey anyway, so onward sometimes. This happens with images of the holy as well. We may detest what is attributed to something holy, though we know that the offending sensation is very well within us. An angry God, a jealous God, a judgmental God are all metaphors that many of us understandably reject. We seek not to worship those qualities and try to distance ourselves from them, even though if we know ourselves to be from time to time angry and jealous and judgmental. That's the value of those depictions of the holy, not that they really tell us about the holy, but that they tell us about ourselves. Those human qualities voiced and written by the humans making those human depictions of the divine are, well, quite human. They're people ascribing onto the idea of the divine particular human qualities. Sometimes the goddess is mad and angry, as are we. Sometimes the god is insecure and jealous, as are we. Sometimes the deity is patient and kind, as are we. Sometimes they create, sometimes they destroy, sometimes they plant, sometimes they pluck, as do we. And sometimes the divine is of great and powerful love, as are we. This book-like partial wall behind Drake and me can be considered a reredos in the architecture of a worship space. A reredos is a screen placed at the back of an altar in a space that usually includes a pulpit or a lectern, a table, and some symbols of the faith. The reredos enhances and beautifies the sacred space in which the liturgy is led, which is just a portion of the sacred space in which we are all gathered. The whole room is sacred, is a sanctuary, but different parts serve different purposes. And the reredos is what marks off the back, essentially, of the chancel and kind of cocoons that particular sacred space of the altar and all of its accoutrements. And in some ways of thinking, not many, but some ways of thinking, the holy is behind the reredos. The idea being that the divine is present, but not visible. We can face it, pray to it, sing to it, but never fully know it or see it. And yet we project onto the reredos what we imagine of the divine. It's a screen, literally, behind which is whatever metaphor we go with for the unknowable, upon which we paint that which we think we know. If it's what we worship, we paint positive things onto the reredos in our minds and hearts: love, patience, forgiveness, balance. If it's what we reject, we paint negative things onto the reredos: judgment, anger, division, jealousy. And sometimes what we paint in negation carries far more energy and certainty than what we paint in positivity. We paint with assurance that which we reject, and sometimes with more tentative strokes that which we embrace. We are confident in rejection, less so in acceptance. There are countless images upon this reredos, some positive and worthy of worship, some negative and worthy of dismissal, though that usually comes with some wrestling. But we are creating what we embrace and reject, just as the dog in the hall of mirrors created the experience that almost overcame her. In some versions of that folk story, they do overcome her. In some versions, she is stuck in a closed room in a museum all night with those mirrors, facing an anger that she never understands, building a fear that never lessens, threatening and being threatened hour after hour after hour in this non-ending dark night of the soul, until the guards open the door and the next morning find that she has died. She is lifeless, surrounded by lifeless dogs. She has slain the beast, but had to be slain to do it. The inverse of this is part of what attracts people to the universalism of our faith. Traditionally, universalism was the belief that all souls return to God at some point in eternity, that there is no eternal damnation. For some universalists, hell was real, and some went there in the afterlife, but not forever. For others, hell was experienced in this life, the polar opposite of the love and bliss that we feel sometimes. And the afterlife was one of only love for all people for all time. Thus, the goal of life was to create more heaven-like experiences for more and more people here and now, and not worry about death. That was settled. We would go to a loving place, and the religious life was to be spent mirroring as best as possible our understandings of paradise, of the beloved community here on earth. In other words, we were to paint upon the screen a good and just world for everyone, worship that image, grow our faith in it, and then go build it. But moreover, that ending of universal love for everyone wasn't because people didn't have base impulses and selfish tendencies. It was because the divine was of that universal love, a love for all people and all souls. The center of the divine, however we imagine the holy, whatever images we paint on the reredoses of our minds and hearts and imprint upon each other and teach and argue with about among one another, it was love. Just like our faith's new value statements places love right at the center of everything. Our forebears flipped the script a little on the predominant Calvinism of the day, which argued that all were predestined for heaven or hell, by saying that indeed all are predestined, but only for heaven, because God's love is that great. People sometimes aren't that great. People can be awful, but in the end, even if it's an end that is very, very, very far away, love always wins. All returns to the source. All are kin, and all are saved. And with that image, Universalists set out about building that kind of world here on earth, acting often with more urgency and prophecy than their cousins, the Unitarians, throughout the 18th and 19th centuries in America. To be sure, both denominations were socially progressive in their days. Both were always liberal faiths. But Universalists more so, because as a faith, they imprinted this absolute unending love upon the divine, and then went and worked to build a world aligned with that value and their many images of it. They were one example of many of how we become what we worship. And so we must be very careful with what we worship. If it's wrath and anger and judgment, we become those things. If it's love and justice and forgiveness, we become those too. In that journey, rejection is a part of faith development, as is embrace, as is acceptance, as is humble, affirming service to a sense of something good and true and life-affirming, even if we're not sure what that is. Because no one is really sure of what that is. It's behind the reredos. We face it without seeing it. And even if we go back there and try and peek, it's just a roof and some trees and some stairs down to my office. We still won't see the holy. I take those stairs many times every week, never had a mystical experience on them. I have up here, though, with you all in worship, facing the unknowable love and hoping to serve it somehow in the days and weeks to come. I felt that sense among you too, even though we're all imagining different images and metaphors, actively rejecting different things, haltingly embracing other assurances. The one that can be difficult to embrace is that simple one that assures us that we are loved, that I am loved, that you are loved. This is the root of universalism, sometimes glossed over when we move too quickly to activism and prophecy. All of this is rooted in a claim that you are of divine and sacred love. And it's you as in personally you, not the universal you, that's true too, but the you as a person. You as a person are loved, and it'll never go away. That love embraces you when you fail, when you are hurt, when you wrong someone, and when you cause pain. It's the love of this morning's first poet who spoke of her love getting the worst of her, but still loving her. It's the love of the second poet who, though life makes us knock each other around a bit, we still help each other back up. You don't have to earn that love or compete for it or pray the right words for it or voice the right creeds for it. You are of that love, surrounded by it, living in it, and breathing it for your whole life. And universalism starts there, from that growing spiritual center of abundance and assurance, of goodness and hope, that knows, sees, and names evil, but proclaims nonetheless that love always rises ascendant, that knows that from a bottomless divine well we draw forth the love to serve the world. We look at ourselves and see it, which lets us look at others and see it too. We know it within, and then we imagine it upon the deity. We don't wonder who will be judged and harmed by an angry God. Instead, we hear the call of love sound forth and respond with faithful justice and deep compassion. We worship that and become more of that. Never perfectly, but good and getting better, and with blessings that are offered in increasing scope. The dog in the hall of mirrors saw fear and danger and responded with anger. In the happy version of that story, the dog is rescued. In the unhappy version, she is not. But we need not imagine ourselves in that situation, for we know ourselves in that situation. We see in others reflections of ourselves. We see in the holy reflections of ourselves. And if we hold ourselves with contempt, if we are too mean and unforgiving with ourselves, if we believe ourselves to never be worthy of love, we will never enjoy love as fully as we might. It will never assure us as much as it could. And it will never center us unless we center ourselves in it, and in what we imagine of the holy and the collected human spirit. To imagine a presence of love that can always save us, is to create a more loving, more magical, and ultimately more just and peaceful world. A world of less barking and judgment. A world of more embrace and peace. A world in which we see others, and we're not fearful, we're not angry, we're not competing for anything. Instead, we see others and we smile. For the love we share in common comes not from us, but is cultivated within us, by us, and among us. It's a love with which we are graced, as is everyone else. And with that commonality, we can look upon the stranger and never, never fear them, only welcome them. May it be so, and amen. And at the end of our hour, we extinguish our chalice, knowing that its light carries us until we gather again. Go forth grateful for the moments before you, the breath within you, the people among you, and the Spirit guiding you toward lives of love and kindness. And go forth knowing that you are held always, and always with everyone else, by that great love of no beginning and never ending. Go in peace, and amen.